Thanks, everyone. Welcome to the IOP's event, Stories from the Campaign Trail, where we are thrilled to hear from media strategist Mark McKinnon and journalist Alex Wagner about their experiences covering the 2016 campaign and working on Showtime's documentary following the election. The Circus, Inside the Greatest Political Show on Earth, is a nonpartisan documentary series that brought to life the hotly contested 2016 presidential campaign. The weekly half-hour episodes ran from January through November of this year and gave a glimpse behind the scenes of the carefully constructed facade of a presidential campaign. This documentary is unique in that it provided real-time perspective on the election, showing how and why things played out like they did, and changing the way that politics is covered. Mark McKinnon, one of the Circus's producers, is a veteran political consultant and media strategist. He served as the chief media advisor to 5 successful presidential primary and general election campaigns, is the co-founder of No Labels, an organization dedicated to bipartisanship, and served as vice chairman and president of various communications consultancies. He led the media and advertising strategy for both of George W. Bush's successful presidential bids, as well as John McCain's successful primary victory in 2008. Alex Wagner is a prominent political journalist and was the host of Now with Alex Wagner on MSNBC from 2011 to 2015, a senior editor for The Atlantic, and it was recently announced that she will be co-anchoring CBS This Morning Saturday and will be a correspondent for CBS News. In addition to writing and covering the 2016 campaign trail for The Atlantic, Alex helped to develop its live events and video project as they look to expand and diversify their media presence into TV and video. Leading this conversation is Director of Speaker Series Alicia Sams. Please join me in welcoming Mark McKinnon and Alex Wagner.
Thank you, Haley, and thank you, Steve. So, Mark, I just want to, this was a project that you tried to get off the ground for quite a while. Why did you want to make the circus, and what did you think that it could add to the coverage of a campaign?
Having had the opportunity to work in a number of campaigns, and some of them at the presidential level, all of them, but especially the presidential campaigns, are just these fascinating ecosystems of drama and characters and pain and humor, 95% of which the public never sees. And I always thought it would be fascinating, interesting, informative, educational, dramatic, but most importantly, I think it's a noble pursuit. And I think it's even more noble when you see how hard the candidates and their families and the sacrifices that they all make in order to get elected to any office, really, but especially the presidency. There's a great book by Richard Ben Kramer called What It Takes to Run for President. And you can't imagine how difficult it is. So we didn't want people to have to imagine, we wanted to show them. And that was the whole idea and conceit behind the movie. But as you said, it took me 14 years to convince somebody to let us do it. But we got to do it this time. And you were asking about the name of the circus. When that name was first proposed 2 years ago, we were really concerned that would be a little over the top. We thought, oh, I'm not sure. Really, the circus, really? And of course, by the end of the campaign, not only did voters call it the circus, but the candidates did as well. And about a month before the election, Ringling Brothers put out a press release saying, we want our name back. There's a copyright violation of our name. So it turned into into an epic, surprising election, in ways we could never have imagined from the beginning. In fact, if I'd pitched this as a fictional piece, they would have thrown me out of the office for saying it was completely unbelievable and over the top.
Do you want to show? Do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So, the basic idea is, we wanted to show what it's like to be in the cockpit of a presidential campaign, but more importantly, we didn't want this to be something that people saw 6 months or a year after the election, as other political documentaries have done. We wanted it to be real time. In other words, we wanted you to be there as it was happening, so you feel like it's literally there as the news is occurring, and we as the viewers don't know what happens yet. And that's what makes good drama good, is that we don't know how this story ends. So we did 26 episodes, and when they said 26 episodes, which is twice as many as most TV shows get, my initial concern that there would just be weeks where not much was going on. Never happened. But here's a little taste for those of you who haven't seen it. By the way, for those who haven't seen it, there's a YouTube circus page. It's got a ton of content and a bunch of free episodes on it if you want to check it out more. But this is kind of what we were doing.
Campaigning for the presidency never stops. You gotta be willing to be humiliated, ground down, beaten. It requires a drive that's just inhuman.
Please help me welcome the next president of the United States.
The show's a real-time documentary that is going to show not just what happens in campaigns, but why it happens.
Now, just about every candidate in the Republican field is attacking me. I guess something has changed.
We're going to show up close the candidates, their families, their staff.
Time to make a political revolution.
We're asking campaigns to let us spend time in rooms that cameras don't normally go.
Showtime. It's a new reality and new rules.
I only wish the press was honest and they'd show you.
This is a competition unlike any other.
So what is it for both of you? Like, can you tell us a little bit of the experience of being out on the trail? What is it that you loved about running campaigns and you love about covering, just in a nutshell?
I'm glad you showed that because I forgot Chris Christie ran for president.
Hey, by the way,
I literally was like, oh, right.
Excuse me for interrupting, but not only maybe forgot that he was running, but it was recently disclosed that, I mean, we were talking earlier about, I have more than a feeling that Donald Trump didn't think he was going to win. But now we know from early on, he had planned to endorse Chris Christie after Chris Christie won the primaries.
Amazing.
And now there's this weird story out today about where he is in the Trump orbit because Trump is mad at him for photobombing Trump on election night. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
We have a lot to look forward to in the next 4 years. So I tagged along. I was not a full. I would characterize my role as that of a dancing bear in the circus. I joined.
She's our favorite guest host.
I joined Mark and John on the trail for a couple weeks, and then of course I was covering the campaign, or I was covering American politics for The Atlantic, and found myself at certain pivotal campaign moments. You know, I think that there's a difference between covering this campaign and covering most campaigns. And, you know, the fact that there were 17 Republicans running for president at the outset was an indicator that this was going to be a strange one, and it did not disappoint. When you talk about, you know, the circus in specific, I've done TV for a while, and you know, there's a lot of stuff that if you doing a package, there's a lot of stuff that you don't end up using that doesn't make it to air. But I don't think anybody in this audience or any normal person can imagine how much from the campaign trail that was shot for the circus did not actually end up on the circus. I mean, each episode is incredibly tight. And so, you know, each moment has been, I think, is more hard won than you can possibly fathom. There was a day that I was on the trail with Bernie Sanders, and we went to 5 states in one day, and not a single minute of that footage ended up in the show that week. Because, you know, as Mark says, you don't know where the story's going, and at the end of the week, you got to focus on the stuff that matters. So, you know, in a way, it was a test of fortitude, but also, you know, the amazing thing about the circus is you had someone somewhere all the time. And there was never a sense that a moment was going to get missed, which is a Herculean task, but also an amazing accomplishment, given how much was happening in this campaign season. The fact that every week you guys got the story is incredibly impressive.
Well, I mean, part of the ambition was simply to cover an American presidential election. We had no idea that it would turn out to be an election like this, which, as Alex said, was in so many ways so different. But a lot of it was, you know, what made me love all this in the first place was being out in Iowa, being in New Hampshire, and going to these small towns and seeing kind of American democracy in these little towns in the middle of winter. And it's so interesting to see that kind of retail politicking. But as Alex said, this was a different election. And part of, you know, what I said the very first episode of the circus, and I said the very last one, when I went to the first Trump rally in the middle of Arizona in you know, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it was 105 degrees, and I showed up, and there were like lines miles around in the middle of the day, people sweating. I was like, whoa, I've never seen this before. And then like the day before the election in Leesburg, Virginia, at midnight, and you know, people waited in line for 6 hours in the freezing cold. But if you didn't go out there and see that, you don't get it. But only by seeing it, you go, wow, something different is going on here. And then we found out that something different was going on.
And so much was unpredictable. Like I remember it was at the Republican convention when Ted Cruz declined to endorse Donald Trump, and I was going down to meet these guys.
Oh,
on
that's
the,
right.
The,
We
the
had
convention
that
floor.
great intersection with you.
And
You were on the elevator and ran into him.
Right. I was waiting. I was like waiting for an elevator. I had just gotten off the elevator, and Ted Cruz was just getting on the elevator after he had exited the convention floor.
This was like
towards-
Jesus looking for a manger,
Yeah.
right? He was like, nobody was like wanted to talk to Ted Cruz.
And so like for 2 seconds, it was like me and Ted Cruz staring at each other in an elevator bank, and I started asking him questions, and he just kind of stood there, you know, in the way, I don't know if anybody, of course, you guys are in college, when you do something crazy, there's a moment after you do the crazy thing where you're like, holy shit, I just did that. And like that expression was all over Ted Cruz's face. And I remember thinking like, this is a moment, and then ran down
This is why we love Alex Wagner.
well, I just was like Zelig. I found myself like in the middle of these insane moments.
But that's what would happen on the circus. I mean, because we had the capacity and people, we had 60 people working on this at all times, so we could show up in places that other people didn't show and have moments like that.
Yeah.
But that moment, that Ted Cruz moment, was one of the most dramatic of the campaign. If you were in the hall, because everybody in there, except for maybe Ted Cruz and a couple of his campaign people, thought he was going to endorse, and it was this big moment. And when he didn't, man, he was like he dropped a bomb in that place.
Yeah, and actually just running down the hall with like a look of panic on his face was Reince Priebus. It was like, what the fuck just happened? It was amazing. Like, and you know, you get to witness those moments. They're totally invaluable, and they make for great stories when you're at the University of Chicago Institute of Politics 3 months later.
But you don't see them in the news, which is why it's so great to have the ability to.
Well, and the access that these, I mean,
Yeah.
the advantage of working with people like Mark and John and Mark is the access, you know, I said the hustle, the access that they have won over years in politics allowed those, you know, the circus to get behind the scenes.
But you also are making educated guesses, because like your first episode is called The Outsiders, and now looking back, maybe that was genius. I don't know.
I mean, it is interesting to go back and watch watch it all now, because there's a lot of foreshadowing. You know, just throughout the just when you see, you know, the Trump rallies, and I mean, there's just a lot of things that happen now. In retrospect, you're like, oh, there was a sign, there was a sign, there was a sign. But in the very first episode, you know, we just had a sense that, and this didn't take detective work, but it was going to be an outsider elected. There was a huge appetite for something that wasn't typical. And so the whole first episode we dedicated to just 3 candidates, which was kind of a risky thing for our first show. And it was featured Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders, and Ted Cruz. Because, you know, there was a sense then. And by the way, our second to last episode, the title was Nobody Fucking Knows. And we were right about that one, too.
You had great titles. I don't know who titled your episodes, but I mean.
That was always a great debate, the title of the show. That was
From
always,
Russia
like,
with
hours
Love?
That was my favorite title. That was my favorite title.
It's catchy.
That was my favorite title.
So, and then the other kind of interesting difference, and you spend one episode with Megyn Kelly, it's like you also weren't in the bubble. There is a media bubble, which, as we now know, may have had something to do with why the media missed some of this. But can you talk a little bit about the difference between being you behind the scenes with the campaigns and being a reporter on the trail, and kind of what that lack of access does to them, or that?
Well, it was fascinating to be on the other side. I describe being in campaigns as being in human microwaves, and I couldn't have done another one if I wanted to. But I was fascinated to see it from a different perspective. And what I discovered was, particularly, we try to do a lot of thematically. Every episode had a thematic kind of backbone to it in order to be storytellers, and which is what I learned from Hollywood, that it couldn't just be random information of interesting stuff that happened that week. You had to tie it together thematically. And so we did one called The Newsrooms, which you're talking about, which is the whole show was shot through the lens of the newsrooms. And we embedded with Megyn Kelly, and we embedded with Morning Joe, and we embedded on Mark and John's show on Bloomberg, and really kind of told the story through the newsrooms. But I gained a huge appreciation for, and we did it on the debate night, one of the debate nights. So we saw the inside of that control room, which was just like being in a war room of a campaign. I mean, the tension and stress in that television room was insane, and it was wild. And so I gained a whole appreciation for that. But also, I also gained an appreciation for just that delicate dance that everybody was trying to do in this campaign about, wanting to have access, but what do you do to get access? And Trump's campaign was so erratic, and Clinton's campaign was so difficult to just pierce the bubble. So you just had access it's an issue for anybody covering a campaign. And so there are kind of these lines of, how do you maintain your sort of objectivity and all of that and try and get access. And so that's just a fine line and dance that was interesting to observe from this side that I hadn't seen before.
I think there are two sort of forks in terms of access and coverage. Well, let's start with coverage. There's the covering of the campaign, which is necessarily revolves around primaries and, campaign stops. And then there's covering the sort of voters. And I think part of the reason the media and I speak of the media writ large, got this wrong is because we weren't really talking to the voters. We were focused very much on the horse race, which was exciting and interesting. But like George Packer in his book, The Unwinding, did more to tell us about what was going to happen in this election than any kind of media coverage about the campaign. And part of the reason is the stories about voters tend to be stories that aren't covered by political reporters, they're covered by economics reporters, or they're covered in the cultural beat. But there's an intersection between the voters and the candidates, and the outcome of that intersection is, of course, what happens on November 8th. And I think we really lost sight of the fact that, the story of politics is really the story of the people. And I think there's renewed interest in sort of figuring out, okay, how do we actually find out what's going on, and how what's going on is going to determine who's elected?
That is a perfect jumping off point for a couple of things. One is to echo Alex's point, which is the nature of journalism today is because of the evolution of technology and the internet, what have you. There's huge economic pressures on journalistic institutions, which means they have cut back on a lot of the reporters who used to be in the field. So there wasn't a lot of anecdotal information of people out in the field, which they would have seen more of had they gone out to Michigan and Pennsylvania and seen what was going on out there. And Selena Zito is a reporter from the Pittsburgh Gazette. Great reporter. She was on the ground. She's like one of those people who really, was out there talking to those reporters in Pennsylvania. She had the best summary of the election, I think, that anybody had. And she said, the problem with the press and the establishment elite was that they took Trump literally, but not seriously. And his supporters took him seriously, but not literally.
Right.
And by the way, this tees up pretty well for the next clip if we can, which is to say, so a lot of media didn't get it, but of course the Republican establishment elite didn't get it either. And so at the height of the ascendancy, during an important inflection point of the Trump ascendancy in the primaries, this is probably late February, maybe March, where it began to look like Trump actually might be the nominee, we said, let's go to Washington and talk to some really typical establishment insiders and called a bunch of people that we knew who would be on anybody's list of sort of classic Washington insiders. And by the way, we called a bunch of women too, but they were smart enough not to show up to the scene, because you'll see, the scene speaks for itself. But this goes to the point, there's one great line in here that reflects kind of what you were just saying when one of these guys says, well, all Trump has is voters.
Right, those people.
As if they're important. But if we can cue up that establishment clip.
Everybody around this table that I know, we've been in every presidential campaign probably since 1980 in various degrees. And in Trump's problem, he doesn't have a compass. You don't know what his compass is.
And how problematic is that for the future of the party?
I think before it's all over, it's going to be hugely problematic.
I talk to people all the time, as I'm sure everybody around the table does, and they say, why don't you Republicans do something about this guy? I'm sorry, this is not the Soviet Union. We can't call a meeting and decide Trump is out.
And we hate that. Yeah. Benign dictatorship, who's for it? Trump is doing well for one reason. He understands the climate and the culture of America today better than anybody at this table.
How do you feel about the fact that the Republican nominee may be someone that none of you know?
Shell-shocked, bewildered. Republicans are hierarchical, respectful of authority. We fall in line, and Trump has interrupted that cycle.
Donald Trump, nobody thought of him as any kind of political leader until 6 months ago.
He's not articulate, he's not poised, he's not informed. All he has going for him is a lot of votes. Why hasn't any of that hit home? Here we are. Here we are.
And I think everyone's kind of buying into this he's inevitable and that he can't be stopped. I believe he can be stopped.
What are you doing or plan to do to stop him?
He's working with Katie.
Exactly.
What are you doing?
We're working on it. We were effective in Iowa, and that was enough to knock him in a second.
None of us know who you're talking about.
Our principal.
Katie Packer.
Katie Packer.
What's your role in that pack?
Polling, which is now public record.
But which concerns you more? That he'd lose the general if he were the nominee, or how he'd do as president?
Losing the election, what we're facing is a choice between Hillary and
So
Trump.
what you're saying is vote for the least of two evils.
Do you know for sure Trump would be a better president than Hillary Clinton?
No, but it's a risk that I'm willing to take. If we get off into splitting our party, we can't put it back together. Humpty Dumpty won't come back together.
That's the great dividing line in that question right there.
Because you care more about it being president.
I'm scared of him as president. I think he's an authoritarian figure. To deport 12 million people, build a wall on the Mexican border, and impose a religious test on people coming into this country is so violative of everything I believe about America and the Republican Party.
I travel around the world a lot, and Trump is a laughingstock. The world, whatever that is at peace with Hillary Clinton.
The next president's going to decide the direction of the Supreme Court for 4 years, at a minimum. Do you really want to give it to her? Mrs. Warren will be beating the crap out of her to make sure it's some lefty pinko. So you know that's a fact.
Lefty pinko?
This may be a question left.
I mean, what does that mean? But you're right.
In the end, that's the question.
I've never voted for a Democrat, I've never voted for anybody other than a Republican for president of the United States. This would not be an easy thing for me.
More martini?
But that was a perfect reflection of the establishment, how disconnected they were from what happened. And by the way, the Trump people saw that and the internet broke. They went crazy.
Well,
when
it's
they saw
exactly what you picture is a bunch of old white
Old white guys
establishmentarians
that, you know,
chewing
so
over
used to afraid that they're losing
martinis,
power.
Yeah,
You know, talking about all he has is voters.
Right.
turns out that's what you need.
Yeah,
to
it turns
win an
out
election.
voters matter.
Well, and you wrote a piece going back to sort of the narrative idea at the beginning of the summer blockbuster season, too,
Yeah.
about Hollywood and the Hollywood movies, and that, you know, there's some sense that there was a narrative missing
From Clinton's campaign.
From Clinton's campaign, and that there was maybe a narrative that we were just all missing in general, that you sort of said, take a look at. It was an interesting piece.
So, I mean, I don't want to, I guess, I wrote a piece for The Atlantic earlier this summer about, it's the same year, right? Yeah, earlier this summer, about the sort of intersection of blockbuster culture and blockbuster politics. And I think, you know, we talk a lot about the Trump phenomenon in terms of his messaging and his ability to draw a crowd, but Trump, and John Heilman pointed this out to me, and I totally agree with it. He started out as a celebrity with 25 million people who'd watched his show every week. And that, in American politics, I think actually mattered. And I think, you know, we talk about Barack Obama and the crowds. Barack Obama was a celebrity too. And Bernie Sanders ended up being a celebrity as well. And we're in a moment, I think, in American culture, which is, of course, not divorced from American politics, where I call it the age of the gargantuan. I mean, we look for oversized conflict. We look for binary propositions between good and evil. We look for clean resolution. And we look for, like, characters. And turns out Hillary Clinton is none of those things. And I think we, for better or for worse, that's what the American public wants.
Well, I got to send you a column I'm writing for tomorrow, which is on exactly this topic, which is, so we think about the importance of storytelling. We think about it traditionally in terms of movie and books and culture. It's just as important in campaigns. Winning campaigns tell a story. There's a narrative architecture. What do we mean by that? When we talk to campaigns and candidates, we talk about the importance of storytelling. That great campaigns, just like great movies, tell a story. Voters don't want just a bunch of disconnected information, which may be interesting and may be important, but does it connect up to some kind of storyline that gives meaning and coherence to voters? If it does, you're more likely to be successful. So what does that mean? What we say to candidates is, here are the sort of important elements of a classic narrative architecture. Establish a threat or an opportunity out there. You're running to do something. If you're happy with the status quo, you wouldn't be running. So there's a threat or an opportunity to change something out there. There's a victim or victims of the threat or the denied opportunity. Identify the villain. It could be a person or a thing or a government that is imposing the threat or denying the opportunity. Propose solutions, reveal the hero. Now think about that in this election. Donald Trump, pretty easy to see what that storyline was. A threat, immigrants, changing way of life, trade deals, the opportunity, make America great again. Who are the villains? China, trade deals, Mexican immigrants. Who are the victims? Blue-collar Americans across America losing their jobs and a changing way of life. Propose solutions, build a wall, tear up the trade deals, reveal the hero Donald Trump. Pretty clear, classic narrative structure. What was Hillary Clinton's story?
Now, I would just say, I think that's probably been true in American politics for a long time,
Oh, yeah.
right? Like
That's
the narrative
not
is
new.
important.
It's not new.
But I feel like in this day and age, it's supersized.
But he got it. I mean, he's a guy that came from reality TV, so he understood the importance of a narrative
and I think
architecture.
Trump
that's just
fundamentally
natural to
thrives in
him.
conflict because
Yes.
that's good television.
He created conflict on purpose.
But I feel like what we approached in this election cycle is a sort of a wholesale abandonment of nuance and to some degree facts and reality as it concerns some of these villains and victims and solutions.
Sure.
And that's sort of where it tied. I mean, like every movie this summer, if you went to go see it, was like a Marvel action hero, like the apocalypse is coming and only one man can save us. And that's basically where American politics went, right? And I would say that was true for both, Bernie Sanders and some of his proposals were never going to happen. And Donald Trump, we don't know if these things will happen, but certainly they are not tethered to the normal sort of realities of legislation. And yet, that's totally acceptable in our day and age.
And the narrative was aided by some really weird twists and turns, which you might want to talk about on your From Russia with Love clip, if you want to show that one. You have time to,
Okay, so there were many interesting, the Comey, you think about all the intersections, as I said before, when we started off, I wasn't sure we'd be able to fill 26 episodes, and the only challenge we had was cutting every episode because we had so much material. Every week, not just every week, but every day, every hour, just so much happened in this campaign. When you go back and review the last year or two, every single day, incredible, monumental, unique things were happening like we have never seen before. One of those overlays that I think we are only beginning to understand was the Russian overlay, the impact of WikiLeaks. So we decided early on we wanted to do a whole show dedicated to that. And in fact, we were going to go to Moscow, and that was our intention to go to Moscow, and we could never get our visas, which is really interesting looking back on it now.
That is interesting.
We couldn't get a visa to go over there. So at the but right toward the end, Mark Halperin, my colleague, said, "I'm going to London." I said, why are you going to London? He said, "I'm going to go stake out Julian Assange." I said, "Oh, really? Okay, good luck with that." But this is classic Mark Halperin.
That's classic Mark Halperin.
It's classic Mark Halperin. He's just intrepid, and he will go where no others go and stay there for hours in hopes of anything happening. And it turned out to be not only a really good episode, just because we all learned, we did, and I hope our viewers did too, a lot more about WikiLeaks and what they do and their history and strategy, which is fascinating and dangerous and deeply concerning about what it can do, what it has done, what it might do. So anyway, here's the scene from London with Mark Halperin.
So it's Friday night, 7 o'clock. It's the Embassy of Ecuador here in Knightsbridge, one of the fanciest areas of London, where Julian Assange has lived basically in captivity of his own choosing since 2012 in order to avoid prosecution by the Brits, by the Swedes, and potentially by the United States. He's right here, somewhere in there. And we do know that he obsessively looks at the WikiLeaks Twitter account. So I'm going to start tweeting at the guy, see what happens. One of my oldest tricks as a political reporter, in order to get into places like campaign headquarters where you're not supposed to go, is you bring them food. So I'm going to try that trick to get in to see Julian Assange. And we know he likes pizza, and he likes the Scandinavian soda. called malt extract. So let's see what we can do. Really? Definitely came out of there? Yeah, but there is a lot of other stuff in there. Could be a coincidence. Polish. I'm gonna say, Mr. Assange, I'm now outside 3. How you doing?
Where are you guys from?
Where are we from? We're from the U.S.
But who are you?
It's for a channel called Showtime. Who are you with?
I'm from in there.
In there, there's a lot of stuff in there.
There is.
Which part of in there?
Well, it doesn't really matter, does it?
Well, it does if you want answers from us. You can give us some answers.
Well, I don't particularly need answers from you. I'm just wondering if there's something in particular or...
We've been eager doing a show that's airing tomorrow night, or Sunday night rather, on WikiLeaks' role in the American election.
You want to walk over there a minute?
Sure. Is there anything I could do? Could I handwrite a question for him? I mean, I'd love to literally just get him to answer one question. It would only take maybe 30 seconds. Forget the fucking pizza. All right, what should the question be?
It's like a fine line. You want something he will answer.
Yes, that's the thing. What aspect of the Podesta emails do you think the U.S. media has underreported? Not gonna tell me. Okay.
All three.
Even if you just write a short answer.
We got an answer.
My question was, what aspect of the Podesta emails do you think the U.S. media has underreported? One word, everything. The internet has changed the planet. It's changed everything about politics. You got an Australian guy working for an Icelandic organization in an Ecuadorian embassy in the United Kingdom, striking fear in the heart of the Democratic presidential candidate in the United States. That is one hell of a story.
It is an amazing story. And by the way, as I said, we may not ever know the extent to which the intersection of WikiLeaks affected this election. But just as an example, I just found out 2 days ago that WikiLeaks hacked Showtime and got this episode before it went on the air. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, so they're everywhere.
Can I just say one thing about that episode in addition to it being an awesome one? Mark Halperin is crazy, like a fox. And that kind of behavior for people, he's an amazing reporter in part because he's willing to fly to England to tweet at Julian Assange at in the middle of the night and bring him pizza in the hopes that he'll actually write. I mean, we were following Bill Clinton, and I remember Mark heard a rumor that Bill Clinton might be at the hotel gym at 4 o'clock that morning, and went to the hotel gym at 4 o'clock that morning in the hopes of just running into Bill Clinton. And that's how you get the story, is by being there.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Well, it helped that you guys were everywhere.
There was a lot going on everywhere, so it helped to be everywhere.
Exactly.
That's right.
So we're about ready to turn it over for questions. Do you want to show the last?
Yeah, we'll just
clip
show this
before we
one
do?
last clip just to kind of show, this is the very last scene of the very last episode.
And I recommend everybody watching that last episode.
The last
because-
episode, if you have never watched any of it, just watch the last episode because it's obviously an historic week and outcome that was completely surprising to everybody, including Donald Trump, I believe. And Showtime, just anticipating there was going to be a big week, gave us a full hour instead of a half an hour. And just to be, I was at Trump headquarters, Mark was at Clinton's, and John was doing a live show with Stephen Colbert, and just to see how the whole thing kind of winds up and winds down, and just, so contrary to what everybody thought was going to happen, is pretty remarkable. But anyway, this is the last scene.
When this started, I thought one of America's two great political brands, the Bushes or the Clintons, would produce the 45th President of the United States. And instead, one of the great non-political brands in America, Trump, wins instead.
And we enter this new phase with, I think, roughly half of the country in a state of total elation, half of this country in a state of total terror.
For those who are disappointed by this outcome, I would just say this, that maybe your greatest hopes are not going to be realized, but I think that probably your greatest fears won't be either.
What do you think the chances are by June he slapped his name on the buildings?
The Trump House, in gold, right across the front, Trump.
So do you still stand by that last comment?
Yeah, I do. I believe that's the case, that I've seen a version of this movie before in 1980, and I'm not saying there's exact parallels between Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump, obviously very different men, but I can tell you the response was exactly the same. Everybody, half the country woke up in 1980, and half the country woke up this week and said, oh my God, we've just elected an idiot actor, reality show star in this case, and this is the end of the world as we know it. It didn't turn out that way. The system's designed to keep the crazy out, and I say to my Democratic friends that there are some things here which take note of. For example, that Donald Trump was a Democrat about 4 years ago. He is not an ideologue. He's not a conservative right-wing ideologue, and a lot of the things that he's ran on and is doing, tearing up trade deals, very Democratic idea. Big infrastructure plan, was very Democratic. He's going to be a big spender. This is going to drive a lot of the Republican right just crazy. So he's going to be a different kind of president. I think I understand the concerns, and I think that they are legitimate concerns. But I think that we have a system of checks and balances, and that I'm a hopeful, optimistic person by nature, and I just think that he is going to surprise people in maybe some ways that are surprising.
Nobody knows.
Yeah.
So we're ready to turn it over to questions. Did you want to comment on the last scene, Alex?
No, we can.
Okay. I think there will be mics. Oh yeah, there are mics. So just raise your hand. You're like the guy from AP. You always get the first question.
Hi, my name is Matt Enlow. I'm a second-year student at the law school. I'm interested to hear what you think, given the spike in hate crimes against minorities and other marginalized individuals, should be the role of media in responding to and preventing this kind of violence.
Let me kick it over to the media.
Yeah, I don't know that the
Pro here.
media can prevent violence. I think that the media's job is to document what's happening. And I think that, like I said, there's an imperative to be more cognizant of the on-the-ground reality, both in the middle of the country and elsewhere. I think that the implications for Donald Trump's presidency would be both his legislative accomplishments, his legislative record, and also the sort of, fabric of the American democracy. And at present, it seems pretty frayed. So I think it's incumbent on the media to, tell the stories of the American democracy. And that's going to include Trump supporters and people who are terrified of Trump.
I think there's so much about this election that is new and different and important to understand. Not just the election itself, not just Donald Trump and his supporters, but the media as well. And just as the nature of the election has changed, the nature of media and its coverage is constantly changing. But we have a lot of new things this cycle that we're just beginning to deal with and understand. Fake news. This whole fake news phenomenon is a big, big deal. And that is inflaming passions and protests and things based on fake news. You know, people are responding and protesting to things that aren't real. So that's a really big thing that we've got to figure out. And I think this whole thing about the Macedonian students that were creating these fake websites, that is an astonishing story. You know, 100 people in Macedonia, a bunch of unemployed 16-year-olds, were creating these fake web news sites. It's amazing. So that is just one of many profound implications I think that we're just beginning to understand.
So speaking directly to that point, I wonder if you could comment on the fact that if the traditional mode of covering this campaign didn't work, or the polls didn't work, and everything was so different throughout this campaign, and we're going to see a very different and new kind of presidency, how should the media change and adapt to that new kind of presidency? And also, most importantly, who is the arbiter of truth? How does the media gain back the public's trust?
Yeah. Well, again, Alex is kind of the pro on this, but I'll take a stab at it. There are a lot of this goes to kind of the earlier comment about fake news, which is just the responsibility of real news organizations to get it right in this sort of petri dish of just unbelievable sort of microbes of bad information that are spilling around. My hope is that by the very acknowledgement and understanding of the fake news and perhaps a greater barometer of truth from the White House, but hopefully there'll be a higher standard of truth from a president than a candidate, I hope that there'll be a flight to truth and quality in news. In other words, people, I hope more broadly, come to understand that a lot of what they've been hearing and seeing is not real. It's fake or it's not true, and now knowing that, hopefully there is a hunger and appetite for what is true, and that there's a flight to quality to CBS News or the New York Times or whatever it may be. And it's likely bigger brand journalism names that have the resources and history, that people are going to kind of fight through all this stuff and stop seeing all these fake news sites and just go to flight to quality. And truth will gain a greater premium for everybody.
I mean, I hope there's a flight to quality, but I think with the fake, I think there's...
In other words, McKinnon, how quaint.
Well, I mean, I think, unfortunately, my takeaway from the fake news thing is that people are looking at information...
They want to believe, right?
For catharsis. Mm-hmm. They're looking at stuff that makes them feel better about the things they believe, that validates their emotional experience, that presses the right buttons. And unfortunately, that's not the function of information and facts. But a reality has been established wherein you can live in a sort of cubbyhole of news and information and quote unquote reality that is incredibly affirming. And that's like a drug. Mm-hmm. And I think the problem is, the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Atlantic can publish a ton of great investigative on-the-ground reporting about what's happening in America. But we need people all over America to be reading it. And I have a hard time understanding how, in this day and age, you wean people off the drug of affirming information. That's super scary to me.
It's a great point. I mean, we call it confirmation bias, where people seek out information that confirms their predisposed ideologies, and that's why those fake news sites are so popular. Yeah. Because people just want to believe it.
Yeah, they want to believe that Hillary Clinton killed Vince Foster, and then she and Bill Clinton disposed of his body in Monica Lewinsky's backyard. Right. That wasn't an actual headline, but maybe it could have been. Someone out there can make money off of it. Yeah.
Back. Oh, sorry. I can't see.
I'm a huge fan of the show.
Thanks.
And one of the things that I love about it is the transparency and the access. But as a form of new media, do you ever worry or wonder if this is changing the quality and types of candidates we'll see succeed? Is this something structurally that's changing, or is it sort of a byproduct maybe of just American culture or something else?
Well, again, one of the driving ambitions for the show was that we wanted viewers and voters to have a better understanding, a deeper, more contextualized version of these people, not just press releases or speeches or even debates, that they'd see them and their families and their campaign workers and get a much deeper understanding. For example, one of the inspirations for the show was the documentary on Mitt Romney called Mitt. It showed about a year after the election, and it was really good. And I can tell you that most people saw that, including me, and said, well, where was that guy during the election? It was like a whole different version of Mitt Romney, this generous, kind, interesting, compelling human being that they just bottled up and we never saw in the election. And they regret, including Mitt Romney, regret the fact that they didn't do that, release that before the election was over. But that was the deal they made with the filmmakers, was to say, you can't show till after the election. They regret that decision now. I thought, we're going to give the candidates an opportunity to not have that regret, to have the opportunity. You can show whatever you want. Give us an hour or two of a week, and you tell us when you want to do it. We're not investigative reporters. We're not 60 Minutes. I'm not going to go ask Hillary Clinton about her server. You know, we're documentary filmmakers. We just want to hold up a mirror to let the candidates be the candidates. Let them show their human, authentic side, which is what the public wants. And so this just goes to kind of a point I make in the article, and I think kind of a point that Alex is making, is that in order to win and run an American election, you have to understand the media dynamic. You have to understand what voters want. You have to understand that part of what they want to see is you off the debate stage, so see a more authentic side of you. Hillary Clinton in 2008 had this terrific moment, a very documentary moment in New Hampshire. She lost Iowa in a huge upset. Barack Obama wins, and as what usually happened, suddenly he's ahead in New Hampshire, shocks the nation. Suddenly he's up double digits. You know, Clinton, the battleship, the inevitable, was suddenly running behind. And there was a moment one day before the election, about a day or so before the election, where there's this very documentary moment that happens that the cameras catch. It's in a little town hall. She is beaten down, has a cold, has that kind of raspy cough thing going again, and her confidence has been kind of shattered, and she's feeling vulnerable. In other words, human, like the rest of us. And she has this moment where she kind of tears up, and and suddenly she's like articulating this clear rationale, a clear kind of storyline architecture to why she's running, the importance of it, and how, you know, no matter what, the fight's important. And boom, 24 hours later, she erases a double-digit deficit and wins. Direct cause and effect between this just human, authentic moment where we finally saw Hillary Clinton, the person. Now, I had the opportunity over the last number of years to get to know and work with Hillary Clinton a little bit on a nonprofit thing. And like anybody and everybody who's ever gotten to know Hillary Clinton, she is warm, she's engaging, she's got a sense of humor, and there's just a side of her that you never see. And she gets in that insulated bubble, which she did again in this campaign. And you know when I saw another moment like that 2008 moment?
2016.
The day after the election. The concession speech. It was like that concession speech which was so powerful, so compelling, so human, so empathetic to her staff. And just, you know, you saw a side of her that you didn't see in the campaign. And so here's my point. We weren't 60 Minutes and we weren't CBS Evening News, but we had 1 million voters, which ain't nothing. And we were providing an opportunity for the candidates to kind of do whatever they wanted to do. And we lived with Bernie Sanders. I mean, we lived with him, and Jane Sanders became a rock star on our show. Mm-hmm. We had multiple interviews with Donald Trump on his airplane, in his office, at Mar-a-Lago, over the course of, and with Donald Trump Jr., and with Eric Trump. Over the course of the year, the number of interviews we had with Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, or Chelsea Clinton, exactly 0. So whose fault is that? A dead silence.
Up here? Oh, is there someone over there? That's okay. I can't see. The lights are too bright.
My question really wants to come back to the WikiLeaks thing, because I think it's a really dangerous precedent that happened in terms of Podesta, and that, you know, I'm really uncomfortable with what this means for our country and for some really dedicated people running in elections anywhere. and who has access to information that really is how you run a campaign. There's no evil lurking there.
Well, I agree.
That's my opinion.
I agree with you 100%. And I really, I had a bunch of reactions to that. The first thing was, I'm so glad it wasn't me. Second of all, I was so glad it wasn't some campaign that I worked in, because if it had been any other campaign, it would have been over that day. The only thing that surprised me about all this was that there was no real story there.
Yeah.
I mean, to think about all the bad things that could be revealed through emails was kind of like a nothing story, really. But you're right. I mean, the notion that a force can intersect like that has a chilling effect on democracy, on campaigns. And by the way, as I learned more about Julian Assange, that's exactly what his long-range strategy is. He wants to destabilize democracies by doing exactly what you're talking about. And he hates Hillary. Yeah. No, there was no question. You didn't see them get Donald Trump's emails.
I mean, I think the most dangerous precedent was the idea that these emails were stolen. And initially you saw some hand-wringing in the press about whether or not to cover it. But once it went through 1 or 2 days in the news cycle, it was like no longer was there any reservation about the fact that these emails had been stolen out of John Podesta's account. It was open season. And and it was under the guise of, well, it's out there. And once your sort of principles are dictated by not, what is the path of integrity, and where do we want to be on this kind of fundamentally moral question as the fourth estate? But once we cede that ground to, well, it's convenient, or it's everyone else is doing it, then I think you're in really dangerous territory. And I talked about it. I talked about John Podesta's emails on camera, and I am to some degree ashamed that I did. And I think that everybody in the news media needs to think about what the implications are of crossing that, because you can't uncross that line.
Now, how do you put that genie back in the bottle?
Well, I mean, it's a really tough question. And, as Mark points out, Podesta's emails were fairly, there was some griping about this and that. There was clearly a lot of distrust inside the campaign about some of the ways certain scandals were handled. But, at the end of the day, there wasn't much there. Imagine if there had been. And imagine if it had changed the race. And then I think, but when you make a decision like that, you should be making it with your eyes open, and I don't think the media did.
But how about the DNC hack and what that did to sort of make people distrust the party? And do you think that had an impact?
I think all of it sort of was the same.
It's the same. It feeds the narrative that,
yeah. There's the DNC comported itself in a way that I think a lot of people would take issue with, independent of the leak.
Yeah.
But hacked information, stolen information, once that becomes fair game, then, I will also say, I think the long-term repercussions of this, if you're a campaign staffer, I would never email anybody anything real ever again. I think that what the information architecture and the fact that it's so porous is going to actually make a lot of people in sensitive government positions and campaign positions revert to a totally analog system of correspondence, which is picking up the phone and talking to people in person, maybe texting and writing things down on paper.
Yeah. Might not be the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, but in terms of information and transparency,
Yeah.
you kind of want some kind of records. But it is what it is.
Yeah, that's true. I'm sorry, I can't see. There's someone right here. We need the mic, though. Great, thank you.
Mike Tyson has 10-to-1 advantage before he was knocked out by Buster Douglas. Hillary Clinton also was about 10-to-1 in Las Vegas before elections. So when we analyzed Mike Tyson fight, we said he did not train very well, he was taking drugs, something was wrong with him. So what happened with Hillary Clinton?
Well, you want to? Yeah, I'm happy to start.
I think, everything that could have gone wrong went wrong with the Hillary Clinton campaign. One, on the basic level, she was not a change candidate in a change election, right? Two, she, I think the thing that hurt her, the scandal that kept returning was one that she never dealt with in the way that she should have at its inception, which is the email server. 3, I think that the reliance on the coalition that Barack Obama put together with young people, and by the way, white working class Democrats in Rust Belt states, that did not hold together for her, and the assumption that it would was hubristic. And then I think they ran a bad campaign in the closing months. The fact that she did not go to the state of Wisconsin in the general election seems to me to be now almost an inexcusable mistake. And I think that, you know, I said hubristic before. I think when you talk about Clinton world, there was a sense of inevitability that you would think might have been exfoliated after 2008, but clearly was very much still part of the DNA. They never took Donald Trump seriously.
I agree with everything Alex said. I mean, kind of, and there's that, go back to the kind of the narrative architecture that was never fully articulated. We have fairly good information that Bill Clinton, who any of us who've covered politics think is the best politician in American history, bar none, in terms of just natural instincts. But his instincts, we are now told, were manifest by him sort of raging at the campaign leadership to say that they needed to be out in the industrial Midwest with a stronger economic message aimed at white working class voters, right?
Yeah.
So he had that instinct, and you know, I think that you know, everybody was seduced by, you know, the national polling average, which over the course of the campaign, Hillary Clinton was never behind in the national polling average. She was ahead in every single poll. The smartest guy I know in politics, David Plouffe, David Axelrod's former partner, said it was a 100% chance that Hillary Clinton was going to win. Not 99, 100. This is the smartest guy I know in politics. Said it was 100% that Hillary Clinton was going to win. The problem with that sort of message is, to a lot of supporters out there, it's like, well, this thing's done. You know, that's not exactly a message to, you know, get the supporters out if it's 100%. You know, that can be problematic in its own right. You know, but at the end of the day, I also say that it's so easy to look back and second guess everything, but it's sort of like what I said to John McCain. You know, you could have run a perfect campaign in that election, and you would have lost by 4 instead of 6. This was a much closer election. I think there are some things around the margins that could have made, you know, a few thousand vote difference in those key states. But something much deeper than anybody understood was happening. They didn't get it, and nobody else did either.
We have time for 1 or 2 more.
So to use a word that has been used more in this campaign than any other, email, I've been wondering about the coverage of the email scandal in the press. And I read an article recently that did not seem like fake news, that said it was 3 times as much covered as all the policy issues combined. And I just wonder why that story gained such traction with the news media.
Again, this is probably a better one for Alex to answer. I'll just start by saying that, first of all, people ask me about the press being, you know, biased one way or the other, and I say I don't think there's any kind of ideological bias or much of one at all, although I think probably most reporters are Democrats. I think they try and be fair and balanced, sometimes too much so that there's this kind of you know, fairness notion that sometimes we take to extremes. But there is a bias to conflict, and the email story is no better story for conflict, right? I mean, you have the FBI director out there 3 different times, you know, interposing himself in the middle of the campaign, which is a much bigger question, I think, about whether the appropriateness of the FBI director doing what he did, which I think unquestionably had an impact on this campaign, and I think it's pretty unquestionable there was a negative impact, even though he came out at the end and kind of absolved that. Mark Halperin, when that happened, I was like, oh man, didn't the air go out of the Trump plane when that news broke? And they're like, no, not exactly. They think that just the damage was done, and it just reminded everybody about the whole email controversy. But I heard a number, again, this could be one of those fake news things too, but I heard some number that the collective the collective coverage of, you know, issues, policy issues on the 3 major networks for the entire campaign was 33 minutes. Now, I'm not sure if that's true or not, but I'm sure it's something that would surprise us all.
Yeah, I agree with Mark. Media likes conflict. Media also likes confirmation bias is, you know, the email scandal was useful insofar as it confirmed a lot of suspicions about the kind of person Hillary Clinton secretly was, which is someone who was secretive and trying to bend the rules so that she could, benefit from, unduly benefit. And the Clinton campaign did not handle the scandal well at the beginning. Specifically, the candidate didn't handle it well. And that also confirmed a narrative that Hillary Clinton is a bad campaigner and Hillary Clinton is not good at, owning up to her own mistakes and being transparent and all the rest. So it was a cancer at the beginning and it sort of metastasized. And I will also say, I think there is, and I don't know how many people in the media would own up to this, but there was so much more to mine in Trump's history because he was relatively new to the political stage. And in the closing months of the campaign, there was a lot of negative press on Donald Trump. There was not as much on Hillary Clinton. And the email scandal provided some veneer of, I guess, bipartisanship or balanced coverage insofar as you had something a cudgel to hit both of them over the head with. With Trump, you had many cudgels, but this was the thing that Hillary Clinton had. And Republicans made sure to always return to the email scandal, and so it stayed in the water supply. In terms of the the scale of the controversy, does it measure up with half of, what Trump University or some of his policy proposals? I mean, that's obviously left for the public to decide, and I think, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much for coming. And what happens next?
Don't ask us. Well, you can ask Mark.
Jeez, well, it reminds me of the great Robert Redford movie, The Candidate, where at the end he's like, what do we do now?
Yeah, right.
Well, I alluded to some of it earlier, which is to say that the entire campaign was unconventional. The entire thing was surprising in every imaginable way. So it's hard to prejudge what's going to happen over the next 4 years or year or even 100 days. A lot of it's going to be, we'll get some indication through these cabinet appointments, which are very key, obviously. There's an opportunity here to get some big things done. The Republicans have more control in Washington now than they've had since 1928. So, but we'll see. Obama had a similar branch equivalency in the first 2 years of his presidency, and we'll see the extent to which Democrats want to engage, or they could take a different approach, which many of the Republicans did during the Obama presidency. So. But, the campaign for 2020 has already begun. The Democrats are doubling down. I love the immediate Bernie Sanders slogan, which is hindsight is 2020.
Yeah. I would just say, I think both parties are going to be in a state of relative turmoil. I think that the détente in the Republican Party is going to be short-lived, in part because the titular head of the party is not necessarily a Republican and has already, he has his knives out for Paul Ryan. They may be temporarily put away, but when the rubber hits the road and there is actual tax reform or entitlement reform or infrastructure, whatever it is to be passed, it will be really interesting to see what actually happens inside that circle. Likewise, the Democrats have a real question about where they want the party to go and who they want their leader to be. And on a really basic level, they need to prevent the hemorrhaging that is happening across the party from the state level up to the White House. There are state legislatures and governorships are held in a vast majority by Republicans. That's going to be hugely influential for 2020 with the redistricting that's going to be happening, which will determine the control of the House. The Senate map for Democrats is terrible in 2018. And who will run in 2020? There are huge questions for both parties. But I will say, young people in the audience who may feel bereft in this particular moment, quoting Rahm Emanuel, quoting the Chinese, every crisis presents a new opportunity. And there is going to be, where there's a vacuum for leadership, a lot of interesting stuff can happen. And that means the door is wide open for people at all levels. So that's exciting.
Yeah, and again, I just think we tend to just kind of preconceive what's going to happen, and you know, some people in the Trump orbit, they're very Jacksonian, they're very populist, and so they're, you know, like I said, it's the one thing that's likely to happen is a big, huge infrastructure spending bill,
Right.
You know, which is all, it was a very Democratic idea. So this is going to be unconventional. I just tell everybody to take a breath. Let's not preconceive what's going to happen, and you know, and keep faith that the American system gets messy sometimes, but it works out.
Well, on that note, please join me in thanking Mark McKinnon and Alex Wagner.